talked about, and I think it's this. I saw the announcement by Meta, and some of that is suppressing speech or whatever. So there's this fine line of, just because I say, "Gosh, I'm pro-life," well, then the formula like suppresses me, right? I know this on Facebook. I know when I do a certain post, I can immediately see I'm being suppressed, and then I get suppressed for a long time. And I have ways that I try to do it. I'm just trying to get messages out to my constituents, right? So when you're talking about that, let's talk about those filters. Let's talk about SB 417. Let's talk about things that, what can we do? And I love your database, because transparency, gathering that data, super important. So if we look at SB 417, maybe y'all can shoot that out like first bill you pass, okay? Just get it over here, okay? I don't care if it's an SB or an HB, just get it over here, okay? Because if we can start putting those filters in place, if we can restrict on age limits, and whether that's how you do it, geofencing. I'm also going to ask something about the civil side of this. Is there a way that we can open up liability on and start with your gathering of data? You start suing these companies for the harm that they are doing to our young people. And I don't know if that's class action or if it's each individual family suing them. Is that a possibility?
Well, the problem here is that you have a federal law, which is CDA 230.
230.
That's right. And also
from 1996.
I know.
How did they see that far out in the future?
They didn't. They had no idea what was coming. But the other problem is that these tech companies have won case after case after case, hiding also behind the First Amendment. So the courts have ruled again and again that they can decide what to show and what not to show and what order to show things in. They're private companies. They're just exercising their First Amendment right to free speech. So there's some big problems here. This is the way I look at it. And if you go to EpsteinInBusinessWeek.com, you'll actually see it all in writing. This is the first time right before I testified before the U.S. Congress the first time, I published this big article in Business Week, How to End Google's Worldwide Monopoly on Search. And they fought about it at Business Week, by the way. They fought about it because they didn't want to offend Google. But the point is, there is a way to stop these companies. And sorry, I got off track. I apologize. But perhaps it'll come to me and I can speak up again later.
You were saying that there is a way to stop them. And
well, the way you stop them is you treat the commodity that they manage. What is the commodity that they manage? It's actually data, and then they use the data to attract our attention. But the commodity is data, and data has taken on the same role now that air has, and water, and telephone communications. And if you look back in our history, at least over the last 100 years or so, this happens over and over again. Whenever a commodity or service becomes essential, then greedy people start taking advantage, and then finally the government steps in. The government has to step in, and that's what it's done with every single essential service and commodity that we have, everything. Why hasn't the government stepped in yet and recognized that Google's database, which gives people around the world access to all information, that is an essential commodity now. And that database, that's what my piece is about in Business Week, that database has to become now a public commons. And there's ample precedent for this in law, ample precedent for this in Google's own business practices. It's actually, as far as legislation goes, compared to some of the things you're talking about, this is very light touch regulation. It just means that other entities can have access to their database, which is what they use to generate search results. What would happen over time is that they would suddenly be in a world of competition again, like they were in the beginning. They weren't the first search engine company, they were the 21st. And if you treat this essential commodity as what it is, now in today's world as essential, then you have to go in and regulate the commodity itself. All these other things you're talking about, they're all good, but they're all like little Band-Aids. What you have to go to is the commodity itself. That's where we are. You know, it was, I
Coal course, it's a hard one.
co-course, and my eyeballs are still frozen from.
It would be even if they weren't frozen. It's a hard name. Don't tell Jimmy.
But you asked a very important question, and it really moved me the way you said it, because you said, how did we get here? You know how we got here? Because over time, over the last few decades, data has become an essential commodity, and it's controlled by a couple of big monopolies. Doesn't that ring some bells? Because the same thing happened with electricity.
Okay, I was just going to ask that. Okay, do we regulate this like a utility, just like the electrical network? That's essential. You know, our electrical grid. Man, we spend a lot of time debating the electrical grid here in Texas. Is that where we should move with what you say is an essential?
That's really I'm not a lawyer. I'm a researcher,
PhD, yeah.
and the fact is that's a legal question. You have to look at the different models. But the simplest way I've come up with, and by the way, Ted Cruz was very much on board with this when I discussed it with him. He invited me here for private dinner. We talked tech for almost 3 hours straight, is just look at one big database, or you could name all the big databases all at once and name them as essential commodities to which the public must have free access or easy access or something like that. And then all of a sudden you end up with thousands of other companies emerging and competing with the big ones, and the big ones lose that power to manipulate us, because now you can make your own. A high school student could make a search engine. A high school student can make a social media platform. You have competition, and all those competitors are vying for our eyeballs, not just a couple of big ones, okay, which control our kids 24 hours a day, but thousands of entities. We just like the news media. The news media is regulated, but it's also highly competitive and highly innovative. That's what we have to do. We have to take this other commodity, data, and turn it into and name it for what it is. It's an essential commodity.
And I love those ideas. I just can't believe that there is not something that you can do to a company that is showing minors pornography. I surely we have laws that we have all kind of laws. The good doctor talked about that. We don't even let young people in tanning beds anymore, right? But we are allowing this to filter. Miss Wiggins, thank you for your testimony. To infiltrate the minds of our young people and to potentially forever wreck their lives.
Because we go at them case by case by case, anecdote by anecdote by anecdote, and it doesn't work.
Well, if anybody in Washington, D.C. is listening, do something for this nation and for this world and lead on this.
Well, your Senator Cruz, he's not a lightweight, okay? Those of you who know him, he is really determined to figure this out. But what he told me was he just can't get bipartisan support on these issues because the Democrats have been largely purchased by these companies, and now they're purchasing the Trump administration. I don't know if you've realized the meetings that have taken place in the last few weeks. They've got big money, and they're putting it in, they're the biggest, Google is the biggest lobbyist in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm going to ask this question. Then if D.C. won't do anything, is Texas big enough? And we often do this, and we lead on a lot of issues. Is Texas big enough to take this and say, this is what's going to happen here? And I mean, maybe it's a one-off with 417 or whatever that bill will be this session, and start making this movement.
If I were in your shoes, I would give it a shot. But remember, you're still running up against federal law, and especially the Constitution, First Amendment, in particular, and CDA 230. And so you've got this is tough. This is tough to do. So that's why at the moment we're building this unprecedented database, because we're building now a history. We can go back in time and see what these companies were sending to whom on a massive scale. And that can be used in lawsuits. That can be used by advocacy groups. In other words, you've got to have the data. You cannot rely on anecdotes even though they're horrendous, horrible things, but those just get dismissed. Remember that word, glitches. They're just glitches. And but the data we have, those aren't glitches. That's what they're actually doing on a large scale.
Mr. Chairman, I'll end with this. I want to ask any of you, but we have a lot of screen time with our kids in schools. And just in general, is anyone studying the effects of screen time with children in our schools? You know, we're kind of talking about having it at home at night and it's keeping you up and how it infiltrates, but just literal screen time that sometimes screens have now become the teachers in our classrooms. Is anyone studying that?
Well, Jonathan Haidt has a book, Anxious Generation, and there's tremendous amount of data there. But I would just say the reality is kids are spending 60% more time with their face facing the phone than their face facing a parent or a teacher. So
Or here.
Yeah. So who is educating our kids? The phone.
Which then goes to the algorithms. I know that much of it is set, but it's a slippery slope on if you're not as a parent monitoring what you're being taught. I had a bill last session that would make you have to opt in to some of this data gathering. Where last session, I think it was 595. Basically, children in Senate District 18. Came from parents. They basically, would sit down and they were like saying, "Are you happy today? Are you sad today? Rate that." I mean, with kindergartners. Well, where is that all being aggregated and who's using that data? And a kindergarten might be sad because, like, they only got one blueberry muffin that morning versus, my sibling got two and I got one. And, I was late to the table, so all the blueberry muffins were gone. What are we doing here? And so I think this is a great hearing, and I'm very nervous for our future.